Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have one of our tutors, Nicola Rossi, here with us to talk about what to do if you're not happy with your first semester grades. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together with the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via our contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have one of our tutors, Nicola Rossi, here with us to talk about what to do if you're not happy with your first semester grades. Welcome, Nicola.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited. Before we jump in, could you just give our listeners a bit of background on your career path so they have a little bit of context here?
Sure. So I actually came to law school from a pretty non-traditional path. I was actually a theater major in undergrad and ended up in law school after I developed a vocal disorder during college. And so I took some time off and had to regroup. And I think the thing that drew me to law was a similar thing that draws me to teaching, in that I really like working with people and I like their stories. I think that they're interesting, and the law is filled with interesting people and interesting stories to decipher. And so after law school, I spent most of my career as a litigator and also doing teaching along with that. And now I spend a lot of time tutoring both 1L students and bar exam students, and I really enjoy that work.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of flash back. Do you have any specific memories of getting your first semester law school grades back?
So I don't know that I remember the exact moment I got my grades back, but I definitely remember being surprised.
In a good way or a bad way?
A good way.
Nice.
For the most part. But I think for me, it was almost kind of beginner's luck, because I was just, I came into law school just thinking it was interesting, hoping to do okay, and sort of just doing my best. And so I think the first semester, I've told some of my 1Ls this year, I think I figured out how to do law school, actually my second year of law school. Mm-hmm. And my whole first year, I was kind of just winging it and trying to learn as much as I could. But I was decently surprised by my first semester grades. But I feel like I still probably didn't really know what I was doing then.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a similar sort of experience where I did quite well my first semester and was also kind of shocked by it.
Right.
Second semester was kind of a different story. I had a kind of, mental breakdown about the pressure and whatnot, and ended up clinically depressed and didn't do so well. But, I think we probably are in sort of the minority here of being pleasantly surprised. I think for most people, they're unpleasantly surprised.
Right.
Lee definitely has a story about getting her legal writing grade back and being like, oh my, should I even be in law school? What am I doing here? This is not what I expected to see. So, I think a lot of this is about the curve, right? Everybody kind of hears about the curve going into law school, but it's not until you're really there and you're sitting with these grades and realizing, depending on your school, something like a B- might be the average grade. And, people who go to law school haven't necessarily seen those type of grades unless they took hard science classes as undergrads, because we just didn't have a curve, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm guessing theater probably was not a curved degree.
It was not, although I will say, and maybe this helped me in law school, my particular theater program had the philosophy that they didn't give any A's because there was no perfect actor.
Huh.
So I guess going into law school with having come from that, I probably was a little bit better prepared.
Right.
But I think you're absolutely right, Allison. I think so many people end up in law school. Normally you're in law school because you did well in undergrad.
Right.
You know, these are all students who are used to getting all A's in school. And then just as a practical point, everyone cannot get an A, and actually most people won't get A's on their law school exams. And so that can be sort of a shocking difference from, a political science degree in undergrad or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was sociology undergrad, but I also was pre-med, so I kind of had both of those experiences of like, oh, I'm in organic chemistry, and this is a really competitive class, and it's graded on a curve, and I didn't study, so I'm at the bottom of the curve.
Right.
Versus like my sociology classes where I could kind of roll in and be like, oh, easy A, no problem. So I think people just have to be realistic. I mean, if you look at, I know a lot of law students don't like math, but if you look at the actual math distribution of a curve, you may have 5% of people getting like an actual A, and then some more get an A minus, and then, but there just aren't a lot of those grades to go around. And so I think you have to be realistic here.
I agree. And I think I do remember the moment I realized exactly how many A's there would be in every class. And, I got the number of students in my section and was thinking about, well, if they have to curve it to a B minus, and if somebody gets an A, somebody has to get a C, and like just working out the math in my head and thinking, oh, okay, so 2 people are going to get A's in this class.
Right.
And
exactly.
then you end up with a more realistic perspective, I think, on your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, everybody has their own goals, but I think being realistic about how well you did and didn't do is important. A, because it might make you feel better that, if you're getting B pluses, that's actually probably pretty okay. But it also, I think people do have to be realistic if they're getting really poor grades about what's going on here.
Exactly.
All right. Well, say a student comes to you and they are not happy with their 1L first semester performance. What type of questions would you ask them to help them figure out, how to improve things going forward? What do you think they need to be looking at?
I think that's a great question. And, one of the things that I would ask them is what they did to prepare throughout the semester. And I think that some of the 1Ls I worked with, even just this first semester, they came and started studying for exams probably like a month before exams, and they started doing practice problems then and applying the rules. And throughout the semester, they had thought that they were keeping up really well with their classes. They were doing all the reading and were like, oh, I'm doing great. I completely understand everything. And then they start doing practice problems a couple weeks before the exam. And they're like, oh, wait, I actually don't understand this at all. I need to go back and review this in more detail and learn sort of the intricacies in this rule. And so one of the things that I think to remember for second semester, if you aren't happy with your first semester grades, to think about what you did throughout the semester and think about that practical application of what you're learning sooner rather than later, because sometimes that's a really good way to tell if you're actually understanding things as well as you need to be to do well on the exam.
I 100% agree. I think that's probably the single biggest thing that people do not do early enough, is actually try to apply this material and really drill down into, did I get all the issues? Do I know these rules backwards and forwards? All those kind of things. Absolutely. One thing we often suggest is that students try to talk with their professors about their exams. Do you have any advice on how to do this productively? Because I know this is an area where people get really worked up sometimes about it.
I think that is such a great suggestion. And I think the way to approach it is with a positive attitude and an open mind, which I understand if this is an exam where you didn't do as well as you had hoped. That's sometimes easier said than done. Students can get really nervous. I know I was always nervous in law school going to talk to my professors, or, if it's a class where you wish you had done better, sometimes you can be upset, or you're a little bit bitter. Why didn't I get a better grade on this exam? But I think sort of stepping back and taking a deep breath and approaching it from a positive, I'm open to learn perspective. So asking questions like, what could I have done better? Do you have any recommendations for me on preparing for exams next semester or preparing for class next semester that you think would help me improve my grade? I think professors generally are going to be more receptive to those sorts of open-minded learning questions than questions that are just like, why didn't I do better on this exam?
Right. Yeah, they're definitely not going to be interested in that. They're not interested in like renegotiating your grade, or, you think that maybe you said this and they thought you said that. Like, that's not going to fly. Right. I completely agree. I think you have to go in with the approach of like, I'm just trying to do better for the future. I'd love to get any feedback you have. I think if your professor has given you a sample answer, it needs to be very clear that you have looked at that sample answer and you've really compared it with your work, and, that you've done the work basically to say like, hey, I looked at the sample answer and I'm curious about this or that, or like the way that they did this, why would that be better? Any of these things. And your professors may be more or less willing to talk with you, but overall, I think you'll find at least, one or two of your professors do want to try to help you do better and are willing to have that chat.
Absolutely. I think the other thing to remember about professors is that they're required to grade on a curve.
Right.
So they actually have, they can't make the exams easy, right? Because if everyone spotted all of the issues they wanted you to spot on the exam, then it's absolutely impossible for them to grade it on the curve.
Right. It wouldn't even be fair. I mean, if everybody did really well, then the grades are arbitrary.
Right. So that's another thing to remember. And going and talking to your professor, they probably made the exam difficult on purpose. And it's not because they want you to do poorly. It's because they have to grade it on a curve. They have to have a fair way to distinguish among answers. And so asking them what they were looking for in an excellent answer, and like you said, Allison, always reviewing any sample answers they gave or model answers before you go in, and then just getting their feedback on what they were looking for is a good way to approach it.
Definitely. And I think sometimes, I had friends who were really active in class and the professor seemed to like them a lot, and then they bombed the exam. And it was this moment of like, oh, should I ever talk to this person again? But sometimes they did. And the professor was actually like, I was really surprised by your exam answer. Like, don't take it personally. I still think that you are like a smart person who did well in class. And if you ever want a recommendation, I'd be happy to do that type of thing. So, I think it is sometimes sort of emotional about all of this stuff, but ideally you can kind of handle all of that on your own and be in a good place by the time that you actually try to talk productively with your professors.
I think that's a really smart thing to point out. Sometimes the best recommendations can come from a professor where you maybe didn't do as well as you had hoped first semester, but then if you have that professor again, you go back, you talk to them, you take their feedback and implement it on your next exam, and then show improvement throughout the next semester. I mean, sometimes those are some of the best letters of recommendation that you can get from a professor.
Right, because otherwise, if you did, say you got the A+ in the class and the professor's never heard from you the whole semester, like what do they put on that letter? Like, well, as you can see from their transcript, they got the best grade in the class.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like, great. Okay. I don't know this person at all. I had no idea what their name was. They just aced my exam for whatever reason. And professors are people, and some of them have better people skills than others. But I think most of them, a lot of them at least went into the teaching profession because they enjoy students and they do want to help you. So use that resource.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit. So beyond academics, a lot of first semester 1Ls have issues outside of school, whether they got sick, they were distracted by life stuff. This type of stuff is really important to handle so that it doesn't derail your grades. Do you have any advice on how to get kind of this life stuff in better order going forward?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I think the one thing that students can benefit from second semester of law school is having the experience of the first semester and really understanding practically how much of your time is going to be taken up by studying. And hopefully over, now you get kind of a 3-week break or a several weeks break, depending on where you're in school. And you could take that time to plan out a schedule that's going to work for you well, both throughout the semester and then also during finals time. And I think it is really important to, Allison, you mentioned like your second semester of law school having like a nervous breakdown or something. And so I had similar experiences in law school where I just found myself getting into this, anxious sort of whirlwind throughout the semester or during finals time. And so I think planning your next semester and having outlets to sort of channel some of those nerves and some of the stress can be really helpful. I know exercise helped me a lot. I actually taught indoor cycle at the Student Rec Center during my first year of law school.
Nice.
And that was one of the best things I think I could have done because 2 of my friends and I went there it was just like 45 minutes, Tuesday and Thursday morning, so it doesn't take a lot of time out of studying. But it was something where we were completely away from the law school for an hour of our day. And things like that can be a really important outlet to have. And so if you don't have any of those things or you were missing those first semester, maybe that's something to think about during the break and to plan out for second semester and how you can better balance those things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you made, that now you do have that experience. So you're not going into it the way you were first semester of just sort of blind hopefulness of like, oh, it'll all work out and I'm sure it'll be fine or, whatever. Now you can kind of look back and say, okay, looking at my first semester objectively, what did I do well? What did I not do so well? What are the things I want to change? I also started taking exercise classes through the university gym because they were cheap. And again, it made me actually go twice a week. I mean, my roommate and I signed up for belly dancing at one point.
Oh, that's so fun.
Which was really fun. I mean, I was terrible at it, but it was really, really fun. And it was nice just to have something physical and a mental distraction. We got really into it, actually. She ended up getting videos of these twins from Egypt that we would do in the apartment. I mean,
oh, that's awesome. And having a buddy to do that with it makes it all even better,
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I took all kinds of I think second and third years, I took up squash. And that was all law students and business students, so it might not have been the best break, but it was really good physical activity and it was fun. Anything that's fun that kind of gets you out of the library for an hour, I think it's just really important. Things like even eating well, how was your food consumption? Were you able to feed yourself something beyond pizza every day? All this stuff sounds kind of boring and grown up and adult, but these are sort of things that I think are worth considering.
I think that's absolutely right. And you make an excellent point. Planning out, do you need to look into a meal prep service or, should you be doing meal prepping on Sunday nights or a grocery store run? Because it's important to, fuel your body and your mind with things that are good for you and not just living on coffee and pastries from the coffee shop. And
Right. Yeah, I've
yeah,
definitely been there.
yeah,
That
exactly.
doesn't end well, usually.
Right.
You can do that for about 3 days and then you're going to crash.
Right, right.
Yeah, like my roommates and I got like a CSA at one point. So we at least had fresh vegetables like coming into the house regularly. And then we had to kind of sit down and say, okay, like, are we going to like divide these up? Is somebody going to cook them? Like, who has time? Can somebody like do something with these? I ate a lot of parsnips that year. But, it was good. I learned about rutabaga.
Yes.
New York City in the winter did not have a lot of selection in your CSA box. But hey, it was better than eating pizza.
Yes, absolutely. I did a lot of microwavable vegetables, like the ones that just kind of steam themselves in the
Right.
microwave, because those were maybe not the most economical choice, but sometimes they were what I had time for, and they were super easy.
Yeah.
So I think finding those things is important.
Yeah, now I'm a devotee of the Instapot for everything like rice, beans. I mean, you can do it. Actually, I got a cookbook. You can do a lot of stuff in the Instapot. So something like that, it's easy. I think, just it sounds silly, but spending some time actually thinking through this, I think will probably improve your results in the end.
Absolutely.
Well, another thing a lot of law students have trouble with is holding themselves accountable and staying on task to get things done efficiently. Like you've mentioned kind of a schedule, but do you have any specific tools or strategies that you like to suggest for trying to get better organized in that sense?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the things that helped me in law school was planning out the time that I was going to be working at the law library and treating it, I mentioned I had some years off between undergrad and law school where I was working. And so I approached law school more like a job where I was there from 8 to 6, or I was there from sometimes 8 to 8. But I approached it the way I would approach going into an office, where I'm there for the day, I do my work, and then when I'm finished, I went home. And some people work well in their apartments. I was not somebody who worked well in my apartment. I had to work at the law school. But just figuring out where you work most efficiently and will be the least distracted, I think is one good strategy. Another thing is to sort of plan when you're going to take breaks. It sounds like almost like you're training a small child or a pet or something, but like, okay, when I finish my con law reading, I will get up and go get a tea. Or, just ways to keep yourself on track and keep yourself accomplishing tasks and then taking set breaks in between your reading and your work so that you can feel like you're checking off boxes.
No, I think that's great. One of the more popular posts I did on the Girls Guide to Law School website, like a very long time ago, was actually about a variation of this method called the circles method.
Yes.
Where basically you kind of lay out, like, based on an hour, each circle's an hour, you lay this out, say the night before or whatever it is for the week. And then the beauty of it is if you can say like 45 minutes or 50 minutes straight on task, you get to take the rest of that hour off and you get to color in that circle. And it sounds kind of crazy, but for me, that was extremely motivating.
No, I love that. I think so many people in law school are type A personalities, and just the idea of like coloring in a circle, or like I mentioned, like checking off, it's just that like you get to check it off. I did this. And
Right.
Sometimes that can be incredibly motivating. I think that's great.
Yeah, and when I was studying for exams, if I was starting to panic, I would go back and sometimes look at like the past week of my circles and be like, you know what? I studied for here. It says right here, torts. I colored it in. Like, I'm good. I'm not even kidding.
No, that's awesome. I think that's great.
Yeah, but I think, whatever works for you is what you should do. But you do need some type of strategies. And, there are a lot of tools now people can use, like Lee and I've talked about this a lot, but like, you need some sort of calendar. It should probably be digital. There are other tools like Trello and Asana, and like there are lots and lots of things that you can use And I think you just need to pick one and do it, but you need something, and it can even be a paper planner. I mean, I used that for many years.
Yeah.
You need something to keep track of everything, and also to track how you're doing. And so, if you're setting up a great schedule, but then you're not getting stuff done and you're not hitting your deadlines and you're not getting things done on time, like you kind of need to sit with why that is and figure this out.
I think that's really smart. One other thing that popped into my mind as far as keeping yourself on track, I know some students who came back after working at a firm, after their 1L summer or 2L summer, they came back and they would actually track their time like with timers,
right?
Like you do in billing software, which that is something that for me just throughout working, and I even used it when I was a law clerk and I didn't have to track my time, but I did it just because there's something about kind of like the circle when you start your hour or when you press that button to start the timer, it's like, oh, now I'm in.
Right.
I'm in the work. I have to focus. And if I get up, I have to stop the timer.
Right.
And so just anything like that to sort of dictate the time that you're sitting there.
Right, to keep you in your seat.
Right. I am focusing for this time and then I get a break. So whatever, people have to find which method works for them. But I think taking some time to figure that out is really important.
And I think tracking your time is really useful in the sense of also you can start to learn how long things really take you. So, if you have 30 pages of reading and it's con law, like how long is that going to take you? You probably need to sort of have that sense, or otherwise you're never going to be able to schedule any of this. And if things are taking you way, 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 way longer than you think they should, then I think at that point you've got to start to figure out who you can talk to about that to make sure that you're not, there's not something else going on here.
Absolutely.
Well, we're running a bit short on time, but before we wrap up, let's just talk about some resources that people might consider for getting help. So, we always suggest you go first to your school and see what you already have that you're paying for. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of law schools have academic support. They also, your TAs can be an excellent resource. Depending on, I know I had some great TAs when I was in law school. We also, my law school, I actually started tutoring in law school. We had 3L students for certain 1L students through the academic support program, and it was all voluntary, but students who wanted help with their second semester, 1L year, could go and be assigned a student tutor. And, not all schools have that, or not all schools the students will be eligible, but that's definitely something to check on first.
Yeah, definitely. I think, look at your academic support resources. I mean, if you did really poorly, they might come to you, but you can also go to them. Like we said earlier, talk to your professors. I think TAs are a great resource. If you had some other stuff going on, you might want to look at your school's mental health services. That was definitely a place I showed up second semester and was like, I think I have a problem. Can you help me?
Yes.
And I think starting therapy was actually one of the best life choices I ever made. So I know places are, super backed up right now, both in school and out of school. But if you do think that's something that you need to explore, I would just really encourage people to try to get that help, because I know from personal experience, it can be super helpful.
I completely agree. I did the same thing during my second year of law school and did go to the school's mental health services. And I remember sitting with a therapist and them, I was describing law school and why I was stressed. And they were like, wow, that sounds really stressful. And it was just like somebody pointing out to me that law school is a stressful experience and it was reasonable for me to be anxious about it. Was so helpful. So
no,
yes.
I agree completely. I was like, maybe I have these other issues from childhood and stuff, but also I have a lot going on and it's a lot. And she's like, no, it is a lot. You're dealing with a lot. Of course, you're stressed out. So I think that can be really helpful. If you talk with some of your professors, they might even suggest, maybe you look into some sort of accommodations. I think that can be something to also consider that we haven't really touched on. Do you know that there are issues from earlier that you just, decided that you weren't going to really get accommodations for that you could, or is this something new? Some of these things pop up in law school because the demands are higher than a lot of people's previous experiences might have been. So if you do think there are some things around that, that's definitely something worth looking into as well.
Absolutely.
And finally, of course, if your school's not giving you what you need, you can always hire outside help, like a tutor. You can work with someone like Nicola. You might need an accountability or a life coach. I've worked with a life coach before. It was really helpful, kind of structuring my days. But any of these things, just kind of think about what would be helpful, and are there ways that I can get this help? And it doesn't mean that you need it forever, but you might just need somebody to kind of come in and say, all right, let's look at your schedule. Let's look at your tools. Let's talk about how you can structure your time. All these kind of executive functioning things, or more substantive help can also be helpful, and how to do law school.
I think that's absolutely right, Allison. Like I said, I think I figured out how to actually do the game of law school somewhere around first semester of my second year. Mm-hmm. And so just also not getting discouraged, realizing there are all these resources out there, and understanding how to use those, and that everyone in law school is on this same steep learning curve of figuring out how to do this.
Right. And I just do want to say, if people are disappointed in their grades, this is not the end of your legal career. This does not mean you cannot be successful later in law school, as a lawyer, on the bar exam. Hopefully one day, if you got a first semester grade or two that you're not happy with, that will just be a story that you tell about, how you overcame adversity and went on to succeed, because it definitely is not going to define your entire legal career, even though it might feel that way.
I think that's exactly right, and a really good way to put things in perspective.
All right, well, any final thoughts you have before we wrap up?
I think just, reiterating what you said, that this is not the end of the world, and that everyone in law school is on this learning curve, and that this is a chance to sort of overcome adversity. It's going to be a great interview story, and so use it as that, and use the things that you learned first semester to do even better second semester.
I agree. I think you just got to kind of take this for what it was, really evaluate the situation, evaluate what led you to the point you're at. And then if you do want to make changes, go ahead and make those changes, and hopefully set yourself up for success later.
Absolutely.
Well, Nicola, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This is fun.
My pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.